start recording and welcome you all again. I'm going to go dark, but I will be monitoring the chat. And if you do have any technological questions, my cell phone number and my email, you all have my email address, but I'll be monitoring all of that. Send me a text if you're having technological questions. And with that, thank you very much to Dr. Michael Gass. So happy that you're here, and I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Welcome to everybody here. It's nice to, let's get organized here. It's nice to be with you. I'm actually in my front yard here, and beautiful hummingbirds are just surrounding me, and the flowers here. And we have our front yard is a garden that I have an ongoing battle with our slugs and growing, but it's an appropriate place to be the beginning of a lot of ideas. I teach at the University of New Hampshire and am fortunate enough to be part of the dual degree program, which focuses on training, cross-training people in social work and family therapy with adventure experiences. And one of the participants today, Bonnie Spencer, is one of the originators of students before we even had a degree program. Her efforts there are embodied and are more formalized now. So Bonnie, I think you'd be excited to see what we have here. And we actually have some students here, Martin and Maya and others, that are just starting our dual degree program in social work and adventure therapy. And that'll be a 2.5-year journey for them. And helping us today is Mackenzie Keefe. And she is going to be starting her 2nd year in the program that is being done at UNH. And I think a couple of ground rules would be helpful to get started with. One of the things is to do is this working, Kenzie? So a couple of the things we'll do is, as Lynn said, keep yourself on mute. One of the gifts that Mackenzie will give us is that she'll be monitoring the chat room. And if you have questions, probably first start to see if we can get them put on chat. And we'll monitor and go the direction that the workshop seems to take us. But several things that you can expect today. You can expect for me to share kind of a journey that I've been on for the past 40 years in trying to produce change. When I first began working in 1979 in Greeley, Colorado, in a group home and juvenile transition experiences, I just started seeing how metaphors tied so directly into therapeutic change and how it made life so much easier for me therapeutically. And I began a journey to find out how did that happen and how did that occur. So this is part of the journey that I've been on. Yeah. Keep yourself on mute and chat box, and we'll circle back. So today, probably we're going to go through and present a variety of materials, and then we're going to give you a chance to use the model that we'll give or use your own model that helps you produce therapeutic change with metaphors. So we're going to look at several metaphoric examples of me working with clients. We're going to observe clinically how that use of metaphors works, talk about how and why do metaphors work. There's a 7-step process that I created that worked, and we're going to give you a chance to use that. We're going to look at the research that validates this approach, and we're also going to give you a chance to win a free book. So you can get all of those. It can happen in 3 hours of time. So a little introduction by a colleague of mine who are on TED Talk, and we'll just get a nice little humorous introduction to metaphor.
Hey Mike, can you go on mute so that I can play the...
It's also a great example of how whenever we deal with anything.
Because I was on mute, of course it wasn't. Yes. Should we have audio?
Metaphor lives a secret life all around us. We utter about 6 metaphors a minute. Metaphorical thinking is essential to how we understand ourselves and others, how we communicate, learn, discover, and invent. But metaphor is a way of thought before it is a way with words. Now, to assist me in explaining this, I've enlisted the help of one of our greatest philosophers, the reigning king of the metaphorians, a man whose contributions to the field are so great that he himself has become a metaphor. I am, of course, referring to none other than Elvis Presley. Now, All Shook Up is a great love song. It's also a great example of how whenever we deal with anything abstract, ideas, emotions, feelings, concepts, thoughts, we inevitably resort to metaphor. In All Shook Up, a touch is not a touch, but a chill. Lips are not lips, but volcanoes. She is not she, but a buttercup. And love is not love, but being all shook up. In this, Elvis is following Aristotle's classic definition of metaphor as the process of giving the thing a name that belongs to something else. This is the mathematics of metaphor. And fortunately, it's very simple. X equals Y. This formula works wherever metaphor is present. Elvis uses it, but so does Shakespeare. In his famous line from Romeo and Juliet, Juliet is the sun. Now here, Shakespeare gives the thing, Juliet, a name that belongs to something else, the sun. But whenever we give a thing a name that belongs to something else, we give it a whole network of analogies too. We mix and match what we know about the metaphor's source, in this case the sun, with what we know about its target, Juliet. And metaphor gives us a much more vivid understanding of Juliet than if Shakespeare had literally described what she looks like. So how do we make and understand metaphors? This might look familiar. The first step is pattern recognition. Look at this image. What do you see? 3 wayward packmen and 3 pointy brackets are actually present. What we see, however, are 2 overlapping triangles. Metaphor is not just the detection of patterns, it is the creation of patterns. Second step, conceptual synesthesia. Now, synesthesia is the experience of a stimulus in one sense organ in another sense organ as well, such as colored hearing. People with colored hearing actually see colors when they hear the sounds of words or letters. We all have synesthetic abilities. This is the Buba Kiki test. What you have to do is identify which of these shapes is called Buba and which is called Kiki. If you're like 98% of other people, you will identify the round amoeboid shape as Buba and the sharp spiky one as Kiki. Can we do a quick show of hands? Does that correspond? Okay, I think 99.9 would about cover it. Why do we do that? Because we instinctively find or create a pattern between the round shape and the round sound of Buba and the spiky shape and the spiky sound of Kiki. And many of the metaphors we use every day are synesthetic. Silence is sweet. Neckties are loud. Sexually attractive people are hot. Sexually unattractive people leave us cold. Metaphor creates a kind of conceptual synesthesia in which we understand one concept in the context of another.
in many ways, Jim Gary showed us different patterns of this process. And in my journey to try and bring about therapeutic change, I kept on seeing, particularly through novel and stimulating experiences for clients, that these metaphors were augmented, and we just didn't talk the talk, we walked and talked the talk of this process. And we started to get more intentional in our therapeutic actions with isomorphic links. That's just a fancy word for saying same structure, not same in identity, but same structure that produced parallel processes that created affective, behavioral, and cognitive change. And where successful resolution of the therapy experience was achieved by getting successful resolution of the kinesthetic experience first. And that provided a roadmap and change processes, sometimes very consciously and sometimes very unconsciously, to producing change with clients on what they did. And in many ways, I liken this to my theory of change by using an old climbing rope. And in that process, I see, here we go. I see when I started working with clients, why clients come and see me is that they're in a sort of relationship with unhealthy behaviors or dysfunctional behaviors. And that's mirrored by the rope that you see here of the orange dysfunctional behavior having this relationship with the person and the individual. And our goal is to take the healthy behaviors, the green ones, combine them in this case, it's an OBH experience, but it can be other experiences or processes that create a better relationship and a more reasonable one. So when they leave the therapeutic experience, they leave healthy behavior behind, which is the orange rope, and they have a stronger bonding relationship with healthier behavior, which is the green rope being the healthier behavior and the blue rope being the individual. So once again, starting off, relationship, the orange and the blue rope is unhealthy, introduce healthy behavior. That becomes more connective, more valued, more magnetic, more joining in the process, and leaves unhealthy behavior behind. So that's theory of change for me, through the processes that I try to do with clients on what they do are beginning. Let's see how some of that translates. This is a previous workshop that I've done, and I was doing this and thought I'd show you how I illustrated this in the time of pandemic is not during this time. So we're using this to supplement the change processes.
She's going to Teresa passed through the mind. I met her 20 years ago. Long time. But basically, I just saw Bree, and the two terms I said that describe you now are
happier,
yes,
and more confident.
yes, exactly. All right. So Bree, what I want you to do is go. You're at point A, and right over here, just before Robin, is point B. Can you walk from point A to point B? This isn't a trick question. All right. Come on back. These are the clients we don't see in therapy. Because if they can go from point A to B, they don't need a therapist, right? Okay. So let's stay at point A. Now go to Robin, point A to point B. All right. These also are clients we don't see. Because when they come upon somebody from point A to point B, they already know how to deal with it in a safe way. Going on. All right, now we have point A to point B. I'm going to ask you just to run it and stop right before. Run? No, just one. All right, stop. Bang your knees against the wall. All right, let's say it's a movable object. Walk back a couple steps. I'm going to walk in and put your kneecaps on the chair. All right, these are the clients we see. They come up to something in life that keeps them from getting to where they want to be. How do we deal with that? This is what I think happens. So come back to point A. And I come up with you. And I'm going to take you on an adventure. Step to the side. That's because that's your side. I'll come over to your side. But that's the great thing about adventures that we facilitate. We do that with the client leading the co-creation of the experience. Now what we're going to do is that because that path in your life doesn't work, we're on a parallel path. Walk forward. This is a great adventure. Now we're done. Now go back to life's path because you don't stand the adventure without your life. To the south. This is thanks. For now. This is the journey. This is adventure therapy.
Mm-hmm. So the concept that we're speaking about here in this pattern that you saw Bree work on is the idea around equifinality, which is the therapeutic term is there are many paths to the same end. And the goal is for us to find the path that makes most sense and is most beneficial for the process to get the client to where they need to arrive to. Some paths will not end up at the right goal, so we need to make sure there's a congruency between the outcomes of what the client's experience is and the pathway that they choose to walk. So for example, one that I do quite often, and you may have this, where you have a client come into your first session and they come in like this. They have their arms folded and they may be leaning back here, looking back. Oh, here we go. You may have that client may make a lot of trips around to different therapists because this is a lot of times what clients have is they have their arms folded. So if you want to join me right now and just go ahead and fold your arms. And as you fold your arms, try to think of an adjective that describes your feeling or an adjective that you may see being portrayed by a client that comes into your office like this. Some of the adjectives you may get might be closed, something along the lines, I do not want to be part of this, you're not going to make me change, resistance, might be on guard, might be hiding, a lot of different types of behaviors and different stories in there. But I asked them to look down, and I want you to look down right now and see which of your arms is on top, and fold your arms and put the other arm on top. And what's an adjective that you feel now? Could be an adjective that says, I'm feel uncomfortable, this feels different, this feels new and novel. But that's what we do with kinesthetic metaphors, is that we utilize the experience, particularly if it's novel and stimulating, to bring about a type of risk and change processes that empowers the client to become more solution oriented in what they do in their process. You can fold back if you need to right now. You don't have to stay in that part. But that's the idea behind the kinesthetic part of metaphor, is that we do the words and we bring them to life. So one of the things I say is that if you ever get on an elevator with someone and they say, what do you do for a living? Instead of giving a response, I said, well, just fold your arms for me. And if you have enough floors, you can get through 30 seconds and give them an idea of why kinesthetic metaphors work. I was working with a client, dad and a son, who were at odds with one another and kind of butting heads in what their processes were. And a lot of it had to do with perspective and what the clients had done. And Kenzie, if we can pull this off, we're going to try this. All right. So we have to do it this way. There she is. All right. So think, kind of transpose the reality with Kenzie there and the client in it. So I said to them, I said, do me a favor, before we begin therapy, both of you just stand up for a second. What I'd like you to do is to stick one of your hands straight up in the air and point up. And imagine a clock face that you're drawing on there, and start circling your finger counter or clockwise. If you wearing a digital watch?
Yes.
Okay, you're doing it the right way though. All right. And keep your finger going big, and bring it down so it's even with your navel. And your finger is going what direction?
Counterclockwise.
Oh, let's try it again. We'll try to do it better.
Maybe I should use my digital watch hand.
Okay, go ahead. And you keep going down and going down, and your finger is going counterclockwise. So we were right the first time. Thanks, Kenzie. So doing this with the father and the son several times, and after making several mistakes so-called, the son just said, well, this is a lot like my dad and I. It's just the way my dad sees things, the way dad sees things. And I see things differently. It's just that we're different. It's not that we're wrong or right. It's that we see things from different perspectives on what we have. And that was a crucial breaking point in their therapeutic process, to go through that and utilize just an activity, not just talking about it, but doing an activity that builds bridges and connections in the process. And that perspective was so key in doing that. Well, how does it work? How does it work that through this idea, this son comes up with these fantastic therapeutic processes? The big thing is that metaphors are rooted in kinesthetic and body movement experiences, particularly novel experiences. And most of the time in the brain, most learning, most conscious use, and also we find most dysfunctions lodge themselves in kind of left brain thinking. The idea is that learning by kinesthetic ways and metaphoric and figurative ways lies in the right side of the brain. And in many ways, what we believe, and we've done some interesting studies where we took and we had non-metaphoric language in the client using that, and we took EKGs of their brain, and sure enough, the left side of their brain just was all lit up with activity. But when we used metaphoric language, all of a sudden the right side of the brain became stimulated and started acting up and showing patterns there. So one of the things we're doing is that this right hemisphere, the IFG, is involved in figurative language. And that was one way that you're able to overcome the defense mechanisms in an appropriate way by activating different parts of the brain. That's just been real exciting literature that we've come up in the last few years. But the big thing that builds it is the movement, the novelty, and the stimulation of that process. To get that right hemisphere working is great in the process. Okay. Now, some of the terms that are being used is that they activate transderivational search. And one of the things I say is that, if you're playing Scrabble and you get transderivational as a word there, you've won the game of Scrabble. I mean, especially if you hit a triple word score. It's just, such a fancy word. But basically what transderivational search is that when the mind is in a process that it can't come to a solution to an issue, it moves towards more of a figurative associate memory way. And it lists resources and gives more full brain type of experiences. Let's, I'm a college professor. So one of the things that we love to do is to give quizzes. And in the next, let's see. Okay, so what we're going to do is take, see if we're following the pattern here, right? Is we're going to, as I'm going to flash on a screen, or Kenzie's going to flash on a screen, and they're going to be a list of words that are on there, and there are 12 words. And don't try to write them down because we're only going to give you 2.75 seconds to look at them. And I want you just to see what you see and then see how much you retain of those words. So Kenzie, if you can put your stop clock on 2.75 seconds. Yep, that's enough. Okay, using your chat, write down the words that you saw. So what I'm seeing people say is dream, slumber, pillow, pajamas, snooze. Okay, we're getting some part. How many people saw the word sleep there? Which were interesting, some of you get there. If we go back to there, Kenzie, if we go back to the list of words. So, is the word sleep there? In one sense, literally, it's not there. But in a figurative way, sleep is all over all of these words. And when the brain is subjected towards a task that it can't consciously, literally do, it switches towards a mode that groups things in associative learning. And the big thing about that is that on one hand, sleep is not on this list. On the other hand, sleep is all over this list. It's not represented in a literal way. It's represented there. And that's what transderivational search does, is that it makes you look for those patterns to make sense of the experiences that don't make sense. All right, so the next, we're going to do a quiz now. And in this quiz, you have to choose the best answer. Don't you love it when they say that? They say you have to choose the best answer. And what we're going to do is I want you to choose the best answer of this next one and go with there. So relationships are like gardening, playing badminton, and canoeing. You may have the answer right away, but just think about this and give yourself 10 seconds to think about which one of these makes the best answer. All right. Some of you may have chosen the word gardening. And if you can go to your chat, what we'll do is you can give some of the responses as to why you might have chosen canoeing. What are the reasons why you did? So canoeists, go ahead and write some responses on the chat. What?
I think we can make this an interactive conversation.
Yeah.
Like actually ask people to pipe up and start to interact.
Okay, go ahead and ask them.
For anyone who feels comfortable, we're actually going through a few of these here, and it'd be great actually to have people pop up, like, why did you choose gardening? Why did you choose Pamela or Pandora? You said canoeing. Denise, you said gardening. Maybe this is a section we can actually have some conversation about why you all associate these activities with relationships.
Well, I'll go ahead. I'm sure like there's good reasons for all of them, but I was thinking about gardening just because like you're trying to find the right environment to make something grow. So it's like you're providing some stuff and then seeing what happens, basically.
So I'll jump in. This is Pandora. Canoeing, I basically wrote some words there about collaboration, coordination, distribution of labor, probably stemming from experiences with canoeing where there's more than one person paddling. And I guess that sort of ruled out gardening for me, which I've seen more as a solo act, and playing badminton more as a competitive one.
Curious to hear from someone that chose badminton.
I didn't choose badminton, but I think I can make a case for it. It's just, when you're playing a game, it's just a collaborative process either way. And, you know, the end result isn't necessarily the score, but it's to have fun while you're doing it and enjoy the process of just playing and being together and being partners in a competitive way, even if it's not necessarily to win or to lose. I think that's the case that I could make for it, but I personally chose gardening. I think it's, you're watering and providing nutrients to the relationship to see what it can bloom into.
Awesome. I think we can keep that in mind as we roll through the next few. But Martin, I appreciate you bringing up that I can make a case for it. I think that leads right back to the idea of equifinality that Mike spoke to earlier, which is there are a lot of ways to get from point A to point B. And each of you kind of just shared what transderivational searches look like too. I mean, everybody has their own association with gardening, badminton, and canoe, and that's why different people chose different things. So keep that in mind as we continue our wonderful quiz.
One of the things we did in this is we made it even harder for the badminton people by misspelling it. That's not how you spell badminton. And so it may have been that canoeing became even closer and better choice because we made it harder on badminton.
Yeah, that's why I put it on the chat, like badminton. I haven't heard of it.
because It doesn't exist, although in metaphoric land it does. It's just you needed more of an activity that the more that you can bring and kind of what I call dress the metaphor to guide the client, the more likely the client will grab onto that in a point of unfamiliarity. But to be fair to badminton, we're going to do the next one here. Let's go with the next slide and do the same activity. See how you do. Once again, choose the best answer. And you can use the chat or you can use verbal responses to say, raising children is like gardening, playing badminton, or canoeing. Which one would be one that would match you? The best answer, of course.
I see an answer of gardening. For the same reasons given above, nurturing, giving, and allowing natural growth, canoeing, gardening. Canoeing, needing to be attentive while having moments to enjoy the ride, working together, feeling that you have come through something.
I think I choose canoeing for the reason that the same water that helps you reach to the destination is the same water that could drown you.
Bonnie, I enjoy instinctively, I choose gardening. However, it often feels like badminton. And, you know, you think of creating an adventure experience where the real comes up. Maybe badminton's what you do with someone who's raising children over gardening, because it actually displays what's real and what's happening. Canoeing at the beginning, you're in the stern and doing a lot of the directing and teaching. They have the heaps of enthusiasm, but really, but don't really help. As teens, they sometimes lily dip and sometimes fight for control. As adults, children learn to work in balance with you. Boy, if I could say, I think metaphors are already rising.
Now, most of you are aware of the trust fall or trust lean, this idea of falling back into people's arms. It's a common adventure experience that we're doing. For those of you that know what a trust lean or trust fall or trust circle is about, or a blind trust walk, which answer would you give? Is the best answer giving control to others, communicating your needs, or taking a risk? Which would be the best answer? The best answer. So can we hear from someone who chose giving control to others, why they came up with that choice? So Maya, to put you on the spot, why did you choose that one?
I kind of just felt like, I mean, I think it could be A and C, but honestly, like, you're just like giving control to others and like hoping and trusting that they will catch you. So it's also like it can be seen as taking a risk, but ultimately, like, you're the one putting yourself in someone else's arms, basically.
Mm-hmm. Well said. How about someone who had communicating your needs?
I choose communicating your needs for the reason that as a follower, we ask if the spotter is ready, the communication before you fall.
Well done. In fact, just think about this when you do this trust lean. A lot of times what's used is the words on belay, belay on, climbing, climb away, because those are technically climbing words or words that are operationalized climbing technique. Well, if you're working with people who aren't climbers, one of the ways to make things more isomorphic or more likely transderivational search will be activated is to use words that make sense. So communicating your needs, doing a parent-child thing, and having the child leaning back on the parent. They could start off by saying to their parent, I'm ready to take a risk. And then the father says, I'm here to support you. Just by using those types of words rather than the terms belaying makes a whole much more sense and more connective, more isomorphic to the issues the clients are looking at. What about taking a risk? Oh,
Oops, sorry, I can go back.
taking a risk. Could someone explain why they chose that one?
That was the most chosen option.
So you're not looking at the people. You are, somebody said, making yourself more vulnerable, quite vulnerable, and you're going into the unknown by letting yourself fall.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think also like there's that moment when you're falling that you could have communicated to others all you want, and I don't know, taking a risk and giving control to others feel the same to me. Maybe that's my own stuff, but like there's that moment when you're in the air that's like, okay, this is either gonna happen safely or not.
Once I was working with a client who's the mother of the family had left the family, and the father had taken over. And in the culture of this family, the father worked very hard. He worked 2 to 3 jobs, and on the weekend he was a professional softball player, which I didn't even know that softball players had professional ones. But he would go to softball tournaments, and he would sell his services as a softball player to teams who wanted to win weekend tournaments. So he was physically a big guy and great softball player. But what happens is that he abandoned to do all this type of work, which in his reality was the best thing he could do for his family. And his mother, the mother of his children, basically just took off with actually a motorcycle gang, and he was there to take care of the kids, and he had 5 kids. And what ended up happening is that he would hire a caregiver, and his choices for the first caregiver wasn't so good. The caregiver he hired was found abusing one of the children, and then he came back, and things were okay when he was back at home, and then he chose another caregiver. He left then for a softball tournament, came back, things weren't any better. And what ended up happening is that when his presence was there, and he didn't need people to help him with his family, but when he wasn't there, he was making choices that didn't work. And so what happened is one of the sons was caught stealing TVs out of a Walmart, and he would walk out the front door trying to steal the TV and get caught. He'd come home and his father would strike him to try and make him behave better. And he would be a reason why his dad couldn't leave the family and stayed there. And then what ended up happening is that he found things were getting better. He started going away again. Then all of a sudden, the oldest son started huffing gasoline. That's where he he would just pour gasoline on newspaper, and quite a way to destroy brain cells, but got caught abusing substances, and that way Dad was brought back. And it just seemed to me that that was the architect of their story, was the idea when Dad was home, things were better, and the son would take the abuse of that activity. But when the father would leave, the family was in a precarious situation. So in many ways, I saw the son's behaviors as being a way to bring Dad back. And if he had to sacrifice himself along the way, that was the price he had to pay. So what I did is that I said, well, let me see the dad and the son, and let the rest of the kids stay at home. And I said, there's one thing I just want to do. And so I ended up doing a trust lean with them, with the dad standing behind his son and the son leaning straight back in his father's arms. And so I said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to say, I'm ready to take a risk. And the father say, I'm here to support you. And I trust you. And then you can trust me. So those types of parallel comments. And what I said to the dad is I said, now in this position of catching your son, you're a pretty big guy. And you can stand up here real close, or you can stand back, whatever you want. And so the father said, well, okay, let me stand here. So he stood way back, and the son took a look at that and said, that's not going to work for me. And so he stayed straight, and straight might be a double entendre for this activity. He stayed straight in this ability to lean backwards. And what it was doing is that I told the dad, I said, you can stand real close or you can stand far away. Well, the dad took about a 3-step back approach and said, I'll catch him. And the son looked back kind of squeamishly and bent like a wet noodle before he made any other movements backwards for self-preservation. And I said, that was interesting. And I said, is there another way you can work with your son to help him stay straight? And so one of the things is that he took his hands and he put his hands on the back of the son's shoulder. And then he took a lean back and he stayed straight the whole time. And I said, you know, some families are born with kids that act in a certain way. Some parents can have a very offhanded approach, and that works for the child. However, other children are what I call hands-on kids. Is that the more you stay connective in a positive way to the kid, the better that they'll behave and accomplish the task. So they were wildly successful with his son, with the dad being in contact with his son. They practiced for a while. We ended up spending half of the therapy session doing various trust lean combinations, and they just had a very positive experience that I had not ever seen that behavior before. So I said, well, that's interesting. Let's bring the whole family back next time. Next session, they come in, and the oldest daughter comes in and just sits down in the room and does this. She was not happy. And I said to her, I said, what's up? She goes, it's those two. And I said, what do you mean? It's Billy and which is not his real name, Billy and my dad. And I said, what are they doing? So they're doing this thing where they come up and they start leaning together and they're like pals all of a sudden. And I'm saying, can you show me what they mean? And so the father and the son says, no, we'll show you. So they showed him, and the daughter, after they finished, she said, see, they're like that. And so what I ended up doing was I said, that's interesting. It seems like they're connected. This is what I want you to do. So I asked the 3 kids to go to their dad, who was catching the son, Billy, and put their finger into the belt loop of the dad's belt pants. And I said, when they start doing their action in the way, I want you to pull to get your dad's attention. So they started to go back, and as soon as they went through the commands of I'm ready to take a risk. I'm here to support you. I trust you. You can trust me. Lean back. With all vengeance, the other three kids are pulling on their dad's waist. And he basically said, wait a minute, stop. And he sat down in the chair exhausted. He said, that's what it's like at home. And I said, exactly. And so what we ended up doing is that we ended up constructing a trust circle where instead of pulling on the belt loops of the dad or anyone else, they put their hands up in a supportive position and changed the family structure from being like this to being like this. And that metaphorical kinesthetic pattern opened up just a whole venue of resources for them. And that was just led them towards resolution. So we went through various therapeutic issues. One of the ideas is that one of the things we encountered is that the oldest daughter thought she was pregnant, felt like she couldn't approach her father and make decisions. She found out she wasn't pregnant, but they worked on their processes that worked there. And things just started to get marvelously better for this family. And the youngest daughter one day came up to me and said, is it okay next time if we go on a picnic rather than come here? I said, exactly. That's what I want you to do. So that was the closing, one more session, termination, and that was the end of that. And the family just has prospered ever since that pivotal point. So the idea is that can we get an isomorphic experience that parallels the process that they're going through, where successful resolution of the adventure experience gives the client clues or pathways, equifinality towards successful resolution of the client issue. Let's try one more.
You wanna? Yeah.
Do you want to take a break?
No.
No. Okay. All right. So the next one is group juggle. Group juggle, for those that you who don't know it, is basically, if I can describe it correctly, you basically take a group and you pass a koosh ball, a nice softball, to one another, and you develop a pattern. You can't pass it to the person next to you, and you can't pass it to a person who's already received it. So they develop a pattern of juggling it, and they try to do it in a short amount of time. So like a second per person in the group. So if you have 10 people and they have to pass the ball, the koosh ball, within 10 seconds, and they do that quite easily. Then you go down to 5 seconds, then you go down to 3 seconds. Then you go down for the world record in Durham, New Hampshire in the pandemic year, the pandemic Olympics. What's the amount? And basically there's a pattern that develops in that process. But is that activity most like parenting, corporate planning, or teaching? So I'm going to call on Bonnie Spencer to say, which one of Bonnie is it?
I think of it at most like corporate planning.
And why is that?
Because usually in a corporate group, you get into a rhythm and a mode, a way of doing something, a structure. So it's the first round of group juggling, when you have one ball that you're tossing around. Yeah. You're into a rhythm or a structure. But perhaps when you start throwing in other balls, then it becomes more like, I don't know, teaching or parenting, I guess, because you have new elements or new variables that get thrown at you.
Yeah. Bonnie brings up a great point, is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to work with the client to see what patterns map over best for the particular activity, and her ability to say, well, if you're doing to this angle, it's really more like this. And what you do is you try to change the rules and the activity to mirror that structure. Julie, Tracy, could you give us an answer?
Sure. Hold on. Let me put my other so you can hear me a little bit better. So I actually think that, so I'm parenting actively. So I think in some ways, parenting during a pandemic is actually like group juggling, because more things are being thrown in. And so you create patterns. And I think in some ways this is like teaching to a degree. You create patterns that are consistent. And then when another factor is thrown in, you have to adapt and you have to communicate more effectively or more efficiently or more quickly. And so that's why I think in some ways, for me right now, I'm actively thinking about that parenting. But I also, having done quite a bit of teaching, throwing additional factors in could be a big part of group juggling too.
Yeah, well said. Thank you.
Yeah. And this is Luke.
Luke. Kenzie, which one did you choose?
You know, I think, oh, am I getting funny feedback?
No.
No. I think teaching is what I originally go to, and interestingly enough, during the pandemic time and having lots of friends who are parenting right now, have thought really similarly about parenting. It's like juggling the schedules of different people and jobs and getting schooling done, virtual care. But yeah, interestingly, like parenting comes up because I have so many new parenting friends. That's what I'm hearing a lot of. But teaching's my original answer, because most of my experience, yeah, is in teaching and educating. So that's my transderivational search for sure. Great. So we are kind of bumping up towards the next section of, we've gone over kind of why kinesthetic metaphors work, how they work. We've done some examples and some discussion around kinesthetic metaphor, and the remainder of the workshop is actually going to be looking at the 7-step process and how, as a practitioner, educator, student, whoever you are, how you can take this like a process into how do I create my own metaphors. But if you're anything like me, I've now taken this lesson many times, and yeah, the why and the how and some of those more heady subjects were really challenging, and so I'd love to just give some time for folks to ask questions. Or go back to a subject that was like, I kind of got that, but could we maybe go further into that? So yeah, I would love to open up for that. I can get the handouts shared. It looks like Lynn did share them. We will use those during the next section. But do we have any questions, thoughts, interactions on metaphor so far?
And while people are thinking about that, let me talk about the free book. So when we come back from break, after we go through this process, I put together a book of metaphors, and it was my first volume. And it basically was there for clients that had hired me to teach the metaphorical process. So that's volume 1. And then I wrote a second book called volume 2, but I never published volume 1. So what I ended up doing is that I said, in volume 2, if you go ahead and make a metaphor and use it with a client, I'll reward you by sending you volume 1, book of metaphors. So if you ever find someone with a volume 1, they didn't buy that, they had to earn it. And I want to give you the opportunity to earn the first volume of the book of metaphors by actually taking a metaphor and creating and using the concepts of this workshop. That's volume 2. Even Kenzie doesn't have volume 1. So it's one you can earn, but one you can't buy.
I'm seeing Sarah brought up, I'd be interested in a conversation around how to apply kinesthetic metaphor to teletherapy.
We're actually in the middle of the process. This is great, Sarah, that you brought this up, of Kikori. And that's a doctoral student here, Kendra Bostic, is one of the co-creators of that. And what we're in the process of doing is creating a series of activities online that you could use for your work. And we're developing an educational focus, and then we've just broken up and started to do this summer something that could apply itself to teletherapy. So if you're interested in that, go to the Kikori page and start looking it over. And there you go, it's right there. And we're in the process of putting something together that I think will help teletherapy. Other questions that people have?
So I did a one of those Cape Cod weeks a few years ago, and I'm trying to find his name. He was a Milton Erickson proponent.
Yes.
Zweig, I think.
Zeig, Jeffrey Zeig, Z-E-I-G.
Yeah, and works very similarly.
Yes.
So I don't know, is there any connection between the work that you've developed?
Yes, Milton Erickson, not Eric Erickson. We're talking about Milton Erickson.
Right, hypnotherapy.
Was probably the greatest beginner of this process. And Chloe Madonis and others have been just fantastic in kind of taking their version of Milton Erickson's work and applying it towards their work. Jeff is the director of the Milton Erickson Foundation, which is located in Phoenix, Arizona. And I've actually been lucky enough to present at the Ericksonian conference. And you're exactly spot on, is that we're using the concepts that Milton developed here and trying to spread that around. There's another individual, if you run into his name, he linked many of the concepts of Outward Bound to metaphor, and his name is Stephen Bacon. And he produced a book called The Conscious Use of Metaphor in Outward Bound. And you don't have to be an Outward Bound instructor or do adventure experiences to get an incredible richness, particularly around the concept of archetypes that exist in the process, and how to dress the metaphor, which we'll be spending a lot of time on.
Some of these resources are actually towards the end, which will be provided in your PDF version of the presentation. But to just kind of like tag on to Mike, the archetypes and the Stephen Bacon stuff, a lot of what I've found useful in the teletherapy has been the art of storytelling, which is one of the major sources that I've learned metaphor from. And you know, storytelling can really closely link to having someone do an activity and then come back and really they're just creating all these metaphors for what their experience was. So, plug for storytelling.
Yeah, the big thing I think is that you're looking to activate 3 things. One is the novelty of the experience. So the more unfamiliar the client is with what you're doing, the more that they'll empower right hemisphere thinking, the more stimulated they are by the experience, the better. And then the more you can walk and talk the talk versus just talk the talk, and experience and use figurative language is what's being brought together and building up that full brain learning and right hemisphere thinking. So stimulation, novelty, and then metaphor. Those combined together will bring together. Okay, so let's take a break so people can do a bio break and get their needs met. And we'll be back in 10 minutes.
I think we've built in 15 minutes. So if people want to come back at 10:10, is that good? Okay. You will be asked for CEUs to sign back in, but turn off your cameras. Mackenzie, if you could just nudge me to make sure that I have turned the recording, the taping back on, because I'm going to pause it. All right. See you in 15 minutes, everyone. Hey, everyone, and welcome back. If you're here for CEUs, please do make sure that you type your full name into the chat again. And I have hit the recording button, so we're all set.
So one of the things is how do you construct a pathway for your clients to go and empower themselves towards successful resolution? One of the things around my training as a therapist is that my main job is to really work myself out of a job, to make the families that I work with so capable and so functional in their work, individual, groups, organizations, that they're able to go on without me. Realistically, that should be the goal of every therapist, is to work yourself out of a job, in my opinion. And so one of the things is trying to find a method to the madness, or the gifts that when clients bring, we can take that and help them go through the process. So we're going to describe a 7-step metaphoric process. If you can do it in 3, that's great. It makes it easier through the process. So that's what we're going to go with and start with, and hopefully guide you through the process that will work for you. So the next one. So for me, this is not atypical. Sometimes you can best describe adventure therapy as cognitive behavioral therapy just done outdoors. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to find ways and pathways that will connect the therapeutic experience to resolving the client issue. And what we're looking at is we look for sources in the affect, the feelings, B, the behavior, the thoughts, and C, the cognition or the actions, and C, cognition and thoughts. And it's the relationship of how the structure works together that can address any component, be grounded in the relationship, but ultimately be influence the whole. So we're going to look at affect, behavior, and cognition, and how they build the strength of the metaphor, and understanding what the client's current state is and what their desired state is, what they want to be by being in therapy. Next.
The first step, and all these steps are much more complex than I'm going to explain them. And the first step is much, much, much more complex than I think all the others. And I think you make or break the strength of the metaphor in the first step. And the first step is to state and rank the goals of the client, not yours, the ones of the client. And basically to put them in a positive or a negative focus and a content, and to have those there through an assessment process, whether you're using the changes model or the grabs model or the apple model, whatever model you're using, whatever assessment tool you're using, is to really get those goals that are focused on what will provide the solution for the client of the issue that they're looking at in a structure that provides, for me at least, some type of picture of what the client is working toward.
So I was fortunate enough to be working at Eagleville Hospital with doing staff training and working with clients there. And if you don't know where it is, it's in Eagleville, Pennsylvania. It's a substance abuse treatment center. And we were working on integrating adventure therapy into treatment for the clients that were there. And one of the most difficult populations that we were working with is we were working with adult women who came from family cultures that really bonded them to addictive substances. Their desire and their wish on supporting the system when the system had been falling apart all around them was that they needed to be bonded to that system. And a lot of times what suffered was their ability to be substance free. So what we started to see what are some adventure experiences that just naturally have some isomorphic connections to substance abuse issues. So one of the things we thought about, well, let's put blindfolds on them, because then we can make a connection about being blinded by addiction. Said, okay, we'll talk about that. And what would be an activity where they would be guiding around and they'd mirror what they were trying to do. And right now we're basically trying to find resolution to the substance use disorders that they were experiencing, and they're having difficulty doing that. So they needed to set healthy boundaries around recovery. And then we looked around, do we eliminate certain behavior that brought a lot of dysfunction in their lives as they attempted to solve the problem for others? And we started to say, well, what about these adventure activities? We came up with an activity that is a common one now, wasn't so common back then, of tying a rope that was connected to a series of trees. And so we would have ropes tied to like 9 or 10 trees. We'd place the clients holding onto the rope with one hand, having their other hand up as a bumper, and with a blindfold on, they were to find the end of the maze. And at the end of the maze, they were there to make a choice on whether they would stay in the maze for whatever reason they wanted, or they could take their blindfold and step out of the maze. What we started to see clients do is that some of these concepts worked, but then a lot of the concepts contraindicated what really was valuable for the client. Is that part of the thing is that they needed to ask for help. And so we were working with a heavy AA model at that time, and that was definitely heavy step 1 and some step 3 issues of what we're trying to do. And help in the traditional maze, basically the facilitator stays at the end of one of the ropes. And when the client arrives at that spot, they are tapped on the shoulder and they're asked to make a choice of whether to step out of the maze or go back in. When we do the traditional maze, what happens is that when people get to a physical spot, they make the decision to go back in and be altruistic and help others get out. And we found that that was really contraindicating what was going on in these women's lives. And the idea was that when they asked for help, it was help that was a conscious switch to them. And making that step was not a physical place, but it was an internal mechanism inside themselves that they needed to do. So what we did is we started to say, ask for help when you're targeted, but none of the exits were open until the client asked for help. And wherever they were, they ended up being at an exit when they asked for help. So instead of being a physical place, it was an internal mechanism place that they came to, and an emotional state that they said, I need help with my substance abuse issue. And regardless of where they were in the maze, that opened the door for them to make the decision. And in making the decision, they were asked, do you want to step out or stay back in? So their pattern is that we wanted them to make sure that they placed their sobriety ahead of other behaviors, because that's what was keeping them alive. So in the kind of addictive maze, there was no physical exit. It basically was an emotional exit, or a place that they created by asking for help. And stepping out was the behavior that was most productive for them, because staying back in, they could go to a person and try to get the person to get to an exit, and unless they were ready for themselves to ask for help, the door didn't open for that person. So in this issue, stating and ranking the goals were asking for help was primarily the most important one for the activity, and then making a conscious decision to keep themselves sober was the one we had.
Lost in this maze of addictive process and not being able to get out, going around and around and around and being lost in that process and never getting out. And we know the tragedy that ends up within the life. So hearing those words, doing the maze activity where ropes are connected to trees or poles and people are blindfolded and need to be guided to an exit, those are some very strong themes that I see. And that's where you get that natural adventure experience that still needs to be fine-tuned to be congruent and not contraindicate the treatment objectives, but it has the richness of the isomorphs, the analogies that lie within, the isomorphic connections, the double entendre of words, all of that richness that just naturally occurs there in the client state. That's to do that. So that's the second step.
We want to share with
You're muted.
So the idea becomes is that how will successful resolution to the adventure experience mirror successful resolution to the client issue? And the great thing about this, once again, is the concept of equifinality, is that there are many ways a client can behave and what they bring in. This is great that you brought up Milton Erickson, because he had this concept called utilization theory. And utilization theory to Milton Erickson meant what the client brings to therapy is what you use. And the idea becomes is that you see this as a gift they bring to you. First of all, that they're showing up is a gift to you. The ultimate resistance of a client is just don't show up. But if they showed up, that you're trying to get to an area where you're getting this match, this marriage between the adventure experience and the therapeutic issue. And how does that resolution come? So realistically, this activity is heavily weighted in that structure. And so, for example, one client basically just got so frustrated, they took their hand off the rope, they took off the blindfold, they threw the blindfold on the ground, and they stomped on it. I said, I'm sick and tired of doing this. And I said, you're at an exit. And they said, what do you mean? I said, you just made yourself an exit. You don't want to be part of this anymore. And so we went through their process. That was the gift that they brought. And we worked on structuring it around so it made sense to them that we're able to co-construct that in the process and work ourselves out of the job so the client saw, I do not want to be a part of this anymore. I need help. I need to change my behavior. So not only does the cognition of the structure happen, but their affect and their behaviors mirrored that structure. So isomorphism is not only just cognition, a double entendre word, but it's an affect and a behavior problem. And you structure that around what that particular client wants. So I take it, client comes and I come back here and I work this and I give it back to them. And when I give back, they say, for me, this present, you shouldn't have. This is great. And they just become so attached and attuned to that process that you give back to them. And the big part is that what you want to utilize lies already within the client. It's just up for us to, through almost like a storytelling process, to come up with a resolution in the parts that make best sense. Let's hear more.
Is to look at how the result of the adventure experience will mirror positive resolution of the client issue for them. So for me, it's like, okay, how will getting out of the maze mirror successful resolution of surrendering powerlessness, letting go and let God, all of those first step issues, if you happen to be working in the AA model on the pieces that are there, and see that those make sense. Now, some of those don't make sense, so they need to be fine-tuned and they need to be adjusted with the rules and so forth. One great example is that the traditional maze activity rewards going, not asking for help. We want people to be independent, to search and find the exit and to work. And the only time we want them to ask for help is basically if there's a safety issue, they have a question. But asking for help is not a major theme, but it needs to be introduced in the structure of the activity. So that major theme, that primary goal, in my eyes, mirrors the primary goal resolution of the adventure activity.
So here we come to strengthen this isomorphic connection. And isomorphic, once again, means same structure. Iso, same, morphic structure. So we're trying to invite the client to in a storytelling type of way to the experience to create this parallel process. And you can do this quite easily by changing the name of the activity, to restructure the rules, change the language during the activity using parallel processes. So the idea become asking for help raises a huge benefit for the client in the activity. So there should be activity focused around that process. But once again, you're looking at tailoring the outcome and the process to what makes best sense for that particular client. So you're individualizing therapy to make sense. This activity probably is the most predominantly used adventure therapy experience in substance abuse treatment centers in North America right now. So if you see some activity, this is one that is used quite often. In fact, there's a gentleman who in Tennessee was writing a book, and he says it's like Schindler's List. How many people can we put through the maze and get them on the list, because it's so powerful and meaningful for their training. And there's a book coming out just talking about this one therapeutic issue, an activity for use with substance abuse issues.
The isomorphic connections. So for me, it's this idea of asking for help, the willingness to set appropriate boundaries or setting appropriate boundaries, and the idea of rescuing, and how to make that really is more of a negative content and the other two are more positive. So what you do is, and I do, is restructure the activity in a way where in the traditional maze, the exit is really a physical place. But in the addictive process and asking for help, that is really an internal process that the client makes themselves. So rather than the maze being, the exit for the maze being that external place that we as facilitators establish, the exit for the maze is the actual asking for help of the client. And when the client asks for help, then they're at an exit, regardless of where they are at a physical space when doing that.
So more on isomorphic part. What were the major changes we needed to do to make this work? So the first was we needed to create a description, once again, a story that was analogous to the current state and needs of clients, and making exit from the maze dependent upon the person's ability to ask for help, because we're not looking to transfer the physical capability of a person to walk on a rope with a blindfold on. That's not what we're looking to transfer. We're looking to transfer the process of what goes on and what can be successful. And changing the choices to mirror client choices of abstinence and continuing to blinding addiction process. Have them understand that. And the experience can be quite emotional, and it can take a long time. It can be 45 to 60 minutes. And it's people just wandering around looking for a spot, a way to get out of this addictive maze. And that's what their life is like. It's just like this. How do you make something different? How do you make the change there? And make the choice decision mirror the negative consequences of rescuing and enabling behaviors. I may desperately want him to be out of the maze, but I can't make him do that. He has to decide for himself. And I run the risk of staying in the addictive process and not listening to my own needs. So a lot of this becomes what's the need of the client and what will work best. And when they make a choice to step out of the maze, usually I choose a nice sunny spot and have them just watch and observe the behavior, because by watching and observe, they see that's what I used to be like before I made this choice. And it reinforces and punctuates a lot of the changes the activity brings about, what they're trying to do. Conduct the experience. If you need to kind of do appropriate progression activities that lead up to that, you do that. Make sure that they're in a proper state of group development. A lot of times I'll review verbal framework to ensure that the connection between the adventure experience and the treatment objectives is solid and seen by the clients. I use framing, reframing, just therapeutic technique the whole way, and adjusting the rules and conducting the experience. So I may someone say, I need help. And I may come up to them and I'm saying, what do you need help with? And they say, oh, I just, my shoe's untied. Well, if your shoe's untied, I have you tie your shoe, but you're still in the maze. But if you come up and say, I can't get out of this process by myself, I need help. And I said, you just open up an exit for yourself. So you kind of take behaviors and you use an inductive process to give clients what they need. And I think there's the difference between what they want and what they need. And make sure you punctuate the idea around need. So we conduct the experience, and then we process it. And one of the things about metaphors is that if you do a good job framing the metaphor around the activity, when you come to the therapeutic process of discussing and you doing therapy after the experience, you really don't need to do a whole lot as a facilitator or therapist. You basically just kind of open it up, and what I say is you kind of say, well, what happened? Describe it. And then you go get a donut or something, because the client is so imbibed, enriched, attached to what happened to them. You just allow them to kind of share what they experienced there. And they really take over the group, and you as a therapist are just fine-tuning and punctuating certain points. And the ultimate thing is, how does this parallel your life? And how do you work on that? And then the integration of skills is that you can repeat the activity or other activity that punctuates more of these types of goals from a different perspective. And this gift wrapping it's something that I got from Milton Erickson, and it's this idea that if we create tokens of sentiment that are attached to that, a lot of times what I might do is if it's in your budget, you might have them take their blindfold with them and say, this is it, this is where you are, you have it, and it's part, and whether it goes back on or not is up to you. And it becomes a process of gift wrapping this back. Or I'll take Julie will like this, I'll take a rock, and on one side of it, I'll say, what are behaviors that you learned? What's one word that you learned that you want to keep omnipresent in your life to remember? Or have another group give a gift to them saying, this is what I saw you do. And the more of this you do, the better off you'll be. And so they take around this rock. And I have done this with so many students. I have this great collection of rocks on my windowsill. And just to kind of give some token of centering them to say, I remember that day. That was it. And so gift wrapping is that how can you present to the client this gift you're giving them? And it's not it's not just important what you give, it's how you give it. Is it kind of the type of gift where you know this client would best receive it if you say, hey Julie, come on over here, I got something to show you, and you do it one-on-one. Or if you stand up on a pedestal and you say, everybody listen up, I want to say something about Julie in the last activity. What and how you do it depends upon the client. And that's really what sells the metaphor, is that when you get a match to just bond them together to that dual parallel experience, that's what makes the metaphor work in that process there.
Yeah, Mike, I'd love to just tag on to that quickly here. You know, as you're speaking, all I could think of is really metaphor is just gift wrapping an entire experience, right? It's from step 1 to step 7 that we're artfully creating an experience in the language that we use, the small actions that we take throughout the experience to shift or change the experience to fit it directly to that person, what they're bringing to the experience and what they might leave with the experience. And I especially think the gift wrapping and tokens of sentiment has so much power. In fact, when I posted this webinar early in the week, I had an old friend who's actually on here now. And Julie, if I could put you on the spot, he said, I went to a workshop with Mike years ago at the Wilderness Therapy Symposium, and he sent me a photo of a small token of sentiment that he received and still remembers, his goal and his idea, and says, I look at it, every day looking at that long-term goal for what I'm working towards. And all the time, I've got friends and people that point back to like that rock or that piece of sentiment that like brings you back to all of that experience of that workshop or that whatever happened. And just how powerful those are. I see them working all the time.
It's another parallel example is I was working with a client in probably before most of you were born, in 1986. And it was basically an activity where we took bandanas and we spread them out amongst the group. And the bandana was there. Bonnie will recognize this one. And we take this and we lay all these bandanas out, and you may like a bandana to be given to you as a gift, although you can't get a bandana, you can only be given a bandana. And so in being given a bandana, I went back to one of the clients' homes to do kind of a home visit therapy session. And as I walked in, she goes, wait a minute, I got to be right back. So she runs off, and I'm standing in the house, kind of like wondering what's going on. She comes back and she brings back the bandana that the group had given her back in 1986. She goes, I keep this in my top drawer. It's always there. It's battered now, but this is what the clients gave me. And the idea is that it was given to me because they felt I had a sunny disposition and I was warm and supportive to everyone. And I didn't realize that I had that effect on people, and I started building on that and started getting huge returns. And it all centered around this bandana. So this idea around when you create these punctuating concepts, regardless if it's a thing, it's an emotion, it's a behavior, it's a feeling, they will have lasting effects when they're rewarded by the structure that they find themselves in. Let's try another example. This study is, I basically was, give you a little background on the activity. There was a family that existed there, and they were like, not unlike a lot of families right now, where one of the people was working 2 jobs and the other happened to be the husband, partner, and one person was staying at home with the children, which happens to be another partner. And what they were doing is that they were at their families for a 4th of July picnic. And the working partner came in and said, I'm just so tired, I can't keep my eyes open, and say, I can't go to the fireworks. So what ended up happening is that there was his niece, which was a newborn niece, stayed at home with him, and the rest of the people went to the fireworks. And the niece got colicky, and this doesn't have a good ending. I want to warn people ahead of time. He basically just was not himself, and he ended up picking up the child and shaking it, and the child was killed by that incident. And that incident basically, just that shaken experience reverberated throughout the whole family system. So not only did this egregious act happen, but the father ended up going to jail, and the mother, in this case, happened to be separated from her family of origin because of what the incident that happened. So what ended up happening is that this single parent was now meant to raise 3 children and no family of extended family to help her. And the oldest daughter became the parentified child, and then the 2 sons became very active with their physicality. And so when you walked in their house, you just would see holes in the wall where the sons had basically punched holes in the wall. And one of them actually had a broken finger because he hit a stud. But they came in and we ended up talking about how things were going. And in a traditional session, I said, how do you handle your son? She goes, I'm at a loss. She says, raising my son is like, it's like the pendulum on a clock. Sometimes they swing towards being not 14 and 15, but like 20 and 21 and be very responsible. But other times the pendulum swings back and they're like 12, 11, and their bodies are bigger than what their minds have. And they end up having dysfunctional behaviors. And it's always difficult for me to know when I need to help support them and when I need to give them some slack in what they did. And I said, well, you've just described the average adolescent for one thing. So normalizing behavior was a big part of that. But when we go on the challenge course, there's something I want to do with you. So they basically came and they ended up doing a belaying experience with an inclined log, which is basically a log that starts on the ground and goes to about 30 feet in the air. There it is. That's an inclined log. And the person is on belay, so if they fall, they're protected by the rope. but you can tell people you'll be protected by the rope, but when you get there, you don't feel like the rope's going to hold you, even though it holds 5,000 pounds. So unless you have a big lunch or something, you're probably going to be safe there, but the perception is very difficult for people to do. So what ended up happening is we went very structurally family therapy. We went the parents involved of protecting, and the son around growing. And what ended up happening is that it became a big thing for them, is that knowing when the mother needed to give her son slack, and then went to rein them in to protect them. And so that became stuck around, and a lot of the metaphors started to merge around the idea about getting slack for your needs. So the first thing we did is we created different climbing commands. So this is the seeding that happens by the client before the experience. So, are you safe, Mom? Am I safe, Mom? Yes, you're safe. I'm ready to take a risk. I'm here to support you. Tell me what you need. And the idea became is that when her son was doing well, she needed to give him slack to grow, but she needed to yield him in when things were difficult and he was inappropriate. And recognizing those differences and communicating with him became the real antidote to what the issues became. So what we're going to do is that we're going to watch just a 60-minute clip, and we might watch it maybe once or twice. But I want you to choose what type of a metaphor you want to choose. Do you want to focus on the cognition, which will be the words? Do you want to focus on the behavior? And in the behavior, what I do is I want you to watch the mother's hands. So when she is talking about to me about what's going on, she's pointing to the physical experience and the metaphoric experience, the treatment experience. And you'll find that she has already gone down that climbing rope. Remember how I said there's the bonding of the functional relationship to the client's therapeutic issue? And what you'll see in that process is that she'll block even my efforts to kind of challenge her a little bit about what was the important reality. She'll say, well, I suppose that physical thing we did with the ropes and stuff was important, but the real thing is that when he's doing well, I need to back off. I need to give him slack. And you'll see her physicality match her words. Then the other one is you can see her affect and the way she talks about these sons in an affective way. So the metaphor becomes cognitive, behavioral, and action-oriented. So watch this first one and we'll go through it. And you'll see me tempt her with my right hand a little bit. And the clients, even though this is an older tape, their clients are from the Seacoast area. So you'll see that their heads are washed out to protect their anonymity.
No. It's very different.
How is doing now compared to that time back then?
I can't get over the difference. Because the one thing that I realized was that, when he was doing that walk up the incline thing, and you were saying that he and I were communicating, you liked what you saw and how we were communicating, and you said, when he needs a little slack, Mom, give it to him, and that.
And what did that mean? Does that mean about the rope, or does that mean about something?
I suppose immediately it meant the rope, but in a physical sense. But then in a real sense, it meant that I need to when he's doing well and he's not screwing up, I need to just let him be.
Yeah.
He's doing fine, and so I need to kind of back off and not be on top of him.
You know, and it's amazing how talented he is, isn't it?
He really is. Yeah.
They both are.
They're very gifted kids in a lot of ways. They have very special gifts.
So what has happened is that now you have a mother that's bragging about her kids versus like saying, why am I stuck with these kids? What are they doing? And so that's the richness of kinesthetic metaphors. It doesn't just reside in the cognition. It really goes to build on the stimuli, the novelty, and the movement and the metaphor to strengthen the therapeutic goal in that process. If you watch, do you want to, okay. So when we were, yeah. If you watched her hands, and it's tough to do because the washout covers some of those. See the way where her fingers are pointing.
It's very different. No, it's very
Then I lift my left hand and almost tempt her to buy into the physical type of activity, but she'll reject me appropriately and say, well, I suppose that physical thing you had us do was something. But in a real sense, in the orange and blue rope of what we want, where the client has a relationship with a positive behavior, she has already bought into, when he's doing well, I need to give my son slack to grow up. When he's not doing well, I need to be an authoritative parent and hold him responsible. So if you listen to the words, watch the hands. If you watch the hands, listen to the words. If you've done both, try to get the affect from her to see how that's carrying over. So let's just watch it one more time.
How is doing now compared to that time back then?
I can't get over the difference because the one thing that I realized was that, well, when he was doing that walk up the incline thing, and you were saying that he and I were communicating, you liked what you saw and how we were communicating, and you said, when he needs a little slack, Mom, give it to him, you know, and that's that.
And what did that mean? Did that mean about the rope, or did that mean about something?
I suppose immediately it meant the rope, but in a physical sense. But then in a real sense, it meant that I need to when he's doing well and he's not screwing up, I need to just let him be. Yeah. He's doing fine, and so I need to kind of back off and not be on top of him. You know,
and it's amazing how talented he is, isn't it?
He really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They both are.
They're very gifted kids in a lot of ways. They have very special gifts.
Bonnie, were you part of this? Part of the family expedition? You gotta unmute yourself.
I was part of the family expedition. I don't know that I was part of this particular interaction.
Yeah. This was a federal grant that we did back a while ago.
With Colleen, correct?
Yes. Colleen.
Yep.
Yeah, and then Karina Dolcino took over. So we ran a federal program to work with families for 6 years, and Bonnie was a part of that. So, all right. Any questions? Well, let's go through this. So now when we were debriefing, I really didn't need to say a whole lot because it was so self-evident about how successful or what success meant to this family. And the mother saw the value in rewarding the positive and providing structure when he needed it with difficulty. And it reinforced her image of that pendulum. She goes, it basically normalized the behavior to say, this is just what adolescents do. Sometimes adolescents are 22 years old. Other times adolescents are 8 years old. You just have to adjust your parenting to what the time your son is presenting. And their communication became a lot clearer in the process. But again, when you do metaphors well with therapeutic parts, you end up having such an easier time debriefing. You're not pulling out learnings. The learnings are self-evident, and you're just punctuating that for the client. Okay.
Boy, Mike, this is the part that I get excited about, listening to the description of going through step 1 through 7 And I've done this many times. I've listened to it and have recently just started actually practicing it. And the 7-step process actually does help me to break down. But I meet with kids 8 times a week, or 8 kids every week, and there's a lot of I'll plan, and getting to that point where the debrief just happens smoothly has happened one of probably 50 sessions that I've had so far. So I'm excited to move into this interactive piece with folks, and just encourage that it's actually really challenging when you first start doing this. We're not all as seasoned as Mike Gass.
Thank God. So before we move in, is there anybody have any questions? I threw a lot of stuff at you, and just wondering if there are any
I have one.
questions. Go ahead.
I got a question for you. I actually just typed it out, but I think I'll save some time. So my experience has been a lot more similar to Kenzie's, in that, like, sort of the landing the message sometimes it happens more infrequently than not. And I was just wondering what you've done, or your description of experience like that when it seems very evident that there's a simple message, a simple metaphor, and someone just doesn't get it, where it's just not landing, perhaps because you're dealing with somebody who's on the spectrum, or maybe there's just a mental block. There's a subconscious block, and some part of them is not ready to sort of become aware, or whatever. Maybe they just don't get it. I'm curious to know what your experience of that has been.
Well, the great thing is, if they don't get it, if it just goes right by them, you're not any worse off. You just go to debriefing. So that's one thing, is that metaphors generally said, well, I said, how was the session? He goes, well, that thing you were talking about, I didn't understand what was going on, but that's all right. I understood after we did the activity what was going on. And the other part is that to understand is that sometimes to present initially functional behavior is very scary for clients, and they don't want to go there. And they have a lot of defense mechanisms around there. So you need to find another pathway. And if they hang around, that's good that they're hanging around. They haven't left yet, therapy. But what they've done is they said, well, I don't know what you just talked about, but I'm willing to give you another chance on what you do. And the big part is to utilize what they bring. And if you kind of missed with the metaphor, you regain yourself, say, that happens all the time. And what you start to do is you start to say, what are they using? How are they utilizing metaphors? And my all-time classic is I was working with family couples, and we were doing an incline log, and a family was going through these activities, and we'd talk about metaphors, and I happened to be working with a multi-couple group of 5 couples. And this one couple, I mean, all the other 4 couples, everything was going wonderfully, metaphors abound, didn't need to be there. But one, they said, I don't know what you're talking about in that process. So what I needed to do is go back and regroup myself, and I needed to listen more and observe more. And I started to say, as they did the incline log, one of the husband happened to be going up the log, and the wife in this particular relationship was belaying. And he would get to a point and he'd start wiggling all around, making it impossible for his partner to protect him. And she goes, that's what happens. And he goes, I know that's what happens. I get to a point where you can't keep me safe, and I start gyrating. I go off on my own, and I don't trust you. And I'm saying, but it took them 8 sessions to get to a point where they saw that metaphor. And it was the stimuli and the novelty and my ability to regroup, then I finally got it right. But when it struck there, they said it became, the floodgates are open, and they said, this is what will work. Does that help with the answer? So the big thing is, if it doesn't work, don't worry, you can always debrief. Second thing is, Listen and observe more and see what is metaphoric affectively, cognitively, and behaviorally. And what are the clues that they're giving you, and utilize what the client brings to therapy. And have them describe the story a bit more. What goes on? Does that help, Julie? Okay, good. Any other questions? Go ahead, Kenzie.
I think it's really valuable what you said at step one, both here in this webinar, but also in the video clip, that step one is so much more involved, and it's the stage of assessment, which is, you know, where all of you and your clinical skills come in. And that assessment sometimes does maybe take 8 weeks, eight sessions with clients to figure out like what the heck is going on here. And so it's nice to, you know, hear you share that story, Mike, and remember, oh yeah, like if I'm seeing someone once a week for many weeks at a time, it might be weeks until you get the one that hits them on, you know, hits the hammer on the nail.
And the other thing is that, is a lot of times if I want clients' defense mechanisms to be lessened a little bit, is I'll start off by saying, well, before we get to therapy, there's just one thing I want to try with you. Oh, okay, we're not doing therapy. And you want to be careful and protective of them in the process. But that's one way that I found that clients kind of let me in the back door a little bit easier. Any other questions before we move on?
Deborah had the question about a list of isomorphic activities for specific behaviors.
This is where you earn the book. The book is 64 of these activities, all spelled out, just waiting for you. All you have to do is spend the next part of this workshop writing a metaphor that is applicable to you. And if you do that, you will earn a book. Does that help? Then if you want to buy Book of Metaphors Volume 2, you can buy that one, but you can earn Book of Metaphors Volume 1.
I'm curious, does everybody have the handout? Because that's going to be kind of the basis of what we're working with here. It looks like yes. 1, 2, 7, 21, 17.
So what we're going to do is we're going to go into breakout rooms, and you'll be working with 4 other colleagues, and Kenzie and I will be moving in and out of rooms, and we'll come in, and if you say, no, we're doing fine, get out, well, I'll just go to another room. But if you have a question for us, then that's the time that we can come in and do some supervision.
How much time do you want set?
What do you think, Kenzie? A half an hour?
Yeah, I think by 11:30 we should group back up to share. I think 30 minutes will surprisingly chip away pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, then Michael and Mackenzie, what you will do is you're going into a group and then just put yourself back in the waiting room, but take note of what breakout room you were originally in so I can pop you into a different one.
Okay.
All right.
And just to be clear, so everyone understands, we're going into breakout rooms. There's the outline of the 7-step process. What you all will do is work together to figure out like what client would you like to, what like kind of a generalized client you'd like to create a metaphor for. Maybe it's a family unit, maybe it's a group unit, maybe it's an individual. And together you'll go through that process of like semi-assessing what you might see with these folks to break down what kind of activity you might use. And so hopefully some of you that maybe don't have a repertoire of activities learn some new ones by the end of this.
Mackenzie, are each group coming up with one metaphor, or is each person coming up with a metaphor?
I think the hope is that y'all can work together in each group to come up with one metaphor for one type of client, and then we'll come back together to share.
Perfect. You ready to start?
Yeah.
All right, ready, set, go. Danielle, are you getting a notice to join?
I'm not getting anything on my side over here. Oh, it just popped up as I was talking though.
Good. And Philip, are you getting a notice to join?
Did? I know Alexandra is ready to share big time.
If you remember from the beginning, this is just like we've got a tall building to go down. This is your elevator speech. So like, woo, go.
Both Kenzie and I have scars on our tongues from just allowing silence to take over a group until someone yields.
We can, our group has a somewhat developed scenario. So we are working, and my team, please feel free to kick in, because I just forget things all the time and I conflate completely different, unrelated things. So we started with this situation and our client's needs, starting with a school shooting that occurred in an indigenous community. What they were feeling and thinking, experiencing. There's a lot of survivor's guilt, shame, flashbacks, depression, anxiety, grief, loss, a sense of helplessness and hypervigilance. Behaviors where there was some substance abuse, self-harm, fractures within family dynamics of survivors and not survivors, just the overwhelming trauma, a lot of suicidal ideation, and rumination of guilt. Somatically, they were experiencing holes in the pit of their stomach, emptiness, a weight descending and pulling them into the abyss, restlessness, hypervigilance, agitation, and boredom. And they're looking to move towards feeling lightness, feeling connection again. So what we chose as the isomorphic experiences is having them, we do this over a couple-day workshop. And I know I say a lot and I speak quickly, so feel free to interrupt me anytime if I'm going over. Having each member of this group of teenagers and young adults, each member is going to contribute to building a fire, right? Creating their own light, creating their own heat. And so each one is going to have contribute to a different part of the fire set. One person, here we're going to emphasize each person's unique strengths. Like some people are going to be better at bow drilling. Some people are going to be better at making some of the pieces parts. Some people are going to organize. So everybody contributes what they have to the community. So we'd start off the second day pre-dawn where it's cold and dark, representing the isolation and the emotional coldness they've been experiencing, the lack of connection, the lack of light, lack of warmth. And then they will come together and build a fire there in the darkness, representing their ability to bring themselves through this as a community. Once they got a fire started, we would have one of the elders of their community then present themselves and sort of share some stories of guidance that are culturally relevant to them, in particular walking the path of the peacemaker. We hold a smudge ceremony for cleansing, representing the transition, and then a meal for physical nourishment and the emotional nourishment for their journey. And then we would have sort of we got to sort of transferring an ember, meaning they've gone through this process and they can bring back sort of that last part of the hero's journey, bringing back the light, bringing back the elixir to the community as they move forward. That's more or less it. Does that work? Does that feel complete?
Yeah, there's a lot of storylines going on in that.
Yeah.
I love it. It's very rich.
Yes, very rich. And the idea is to take the one that means the most to them. Start there.
Right.
Good, thank you.
I think it's worth saying as well that you all chose a group, and interestingly, there's so many storylines, and as someone who's worked a lot with groups, sometimes it's one piece of that big storyline that really sinks for folks, and so having those really interplaying is really fitting for the larger group sense.
Can we hear from another group?
I'm ready here for our story. We were talking about body image in teenage girls, which is a really slow process to change. But the anxiety, the worry, the withdrawal, feeling like a fool, people tend to back out of situations and just be tired and lethargic from that. So we're talking about backpacking with the weight in our pack and how we carry it, how we carry the idea. So I kind of want to jump around because if I'm facilitating, I'm going to start there. We're kind of going through how you'd pack the pack, actually packing it, wanting to hike a little ways have them pick up a rock that represents their worry and their anxiety and put it in their pack and hike away with that. And then talk about leaving that behind. So put those rocks on the trail and hike most of the day without that. So then you can kind of circle back to that at the end of the day and talk about how it was to carry it versus putting it down, how they feel just practicing going in the day without that weight, the idea that their body image isn't good enough and they're not getting accepted from that. So setting it up with their worry about how other people see it, and their ability to be more outgoing and spontaneous. So we're kind of hitting their goals of being more included and feeling strong and comfortable and social, as well as just that small group having a lot of inclusion throughout the day. So after that, they can choose to leave the rock. And that idea that their body image isn't good enough is hard to put down, but they can make that choice every day. They can leave that at home every day. And that's a choice that they might need to make every day. But they can work on putting it down in the beginning and at the very least building awareness of what they're carrying and the fact that it's not them being heavier, but how they're carrying that idea with them that is really making the difference.
Great. It sounds great that you choose the stories that the clients bring and present, and those are the ones that are the most important ones. And they'll do that filtering for you. There's a program in the Outdoor Behavioral Healthcare Group Council that I'm a part of, and to run the research there. And one of the programs, Aspiro, does a lot of focus on body image therapy and adventure experiences. ASPIRO. Did Open Sky do much of that, Kenzie? Yeah, Open Sky is another one in Durango, Colorado.
Yeah, Sharon, I've used the rocks and packs for all sorts of things to let go of, but body image is a good one. And actually, I think of, you think of the little things that you can do to shift a metaphor, and we talked about the tokens of sentiment, and sometimes it's like when you're ready to let go of that heavy rock, maybe you pick up one that you can hold in your hand, and you can like rub or keep in your pocket, and it doesn't weigh you down, but it reminds you. So.
I like the imagery there of the rock getting smaller over time too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that's true. It doesn't always go away right away. So.
Can we hear from one other group?
So I'm going to share, I was with Bonnie and Alexandra, and we talked about a client who is an adolescent in high school, and she just moved out of her home and is misusing substances. So we were talking about how she's feeling trapped and alienated from her family, but also like kind of excited for this new adventure and doing like making a lot of changes in her life. She's going to like be moving and whatnot. So we talked about making like a vision board to help her make healthier decisions in her life. So using like, if she has like an artistic ability, like using that in the vision board, and then having different seats in the room for different people in her life. So for her friends and her family and her new friends, and then having her sit in those seats and watching, and she's going to like be able to think about her ideas like from those different perspectives, and watching her present her vision board in different perspectives. That's what we talked about. And if anyone wants to add from my group, you can.
That's great. For those people who know a little bit about Virginia Satir, I talked a little bit about that in her book, People Making, and the activity of family sculpting. There's so many avenues that she offers in that book. She just was ahead of her time and just had huge brilliance in what she had done. So that would be a resource that I think can augment and add to the strength you already have presented. Well, we're almost out of time. So those that didn't get to present, know that you can still get a free book. So if you write to me and send Kenzie and I an activity, we get stronger as therapists, but also you do. So in the adventure, in the Book of Metaphors, Volume 1, there are, I believe, 56 activities. So you give me one, I give you 56, pretty good return on your side, that process. Some people ask about what research. We just actually were awarded a $3.2 million grant that will allow us to look at basically CBT indoors versus CBT outdoors, if I can explain it best in therapeutic language. So for the next 3 years, we'll be spending time looking at when does adventure therapy make sense? How does it compare with studying clients presenting depression, anxiety, substance use disorders? How long do you have to be in the woods for it to make sense? What type of models will work? So just quite a bit of, it's great because for the next 3 years, I don't have to think about what I'm going to do in the next 3 years, because this is what I'm going to be doing. But this is a research that shows this metaphor. This was with corporate clients, and this was a corporate training that lasted 5 days. And if you look at the bottom line there, we took the readings 1 month before the week, 1 month after the week, 6 months after, and then 12 months after. And the bottom line is basically no treatment at all. The next line, which is circles, is basically just doing the activity. Then the third line, which is a square, is when you did metaphors just afterwards. So analogous metaphoric transfer is what we're looking at. Those are the squares. The squares that are white in the middle, the second highest one you can see, is when you have a framework where you do metaphoric introductions at just the beginning. And then the top one is when you use metaphors before the activity to frame the experience isomorphically, and then to brief it afterwards metaphorically for integration. So you can see how the greatest gain is the last one, as well as how much they're retained in the dependent variable for the different types of presentations. So this is common not only in corporate groups, but also therapeutic groups, and also adjunctive therapy groups, that we see the same type of findings. So metaphors abounding before and after is the best use of that. Any questions? there are references. We would talk about John Dewey, but we're not going to have time. Some passing, we'll have to go. And then there's volume 2, and then there's the Kinesthetic Metaphor by them. And any final questions? Last chance.
I am going to, Michael, do you want me to have them email you or Mackenzie with?
Well, I know
What should people send you in order to, do you want a mailing address, an email address? What do you need?
Kenzie, you want to take them?
I think that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, okay. So you got to see them first.
So I'll send in my email here, and when you've got a nice little metaphor, you can send it kind of in that breakdown or in a narrative style, whatever works well for you. And Mike and I will read them together and send me your address, and we'll start sending books out.
Yeah.
Great. Then for people to know, if you're here for CEUs, you'll be getting an email in about 2 minutes with the evaluation. You send it back to, I think I'm going to have you send it to Tori, and then she will send you your certificate. However, I have not created the certificates yet, and I'll be honest, I'm practicing self-care this afternoon and won't be in front of my computer. So you could expect a certificate sometime early next week. I will also, Mackenzie, I think you're going to send me a PDF of the Prezi, and I will send that in a separate email. But you all have Mackenzie's email address so that you can go straight to her for your book. I'm not sending it out with the Prezi, just because there were people who registered and did not join in this morning. So guess what? They don't get a book. Maybe that sounds snippy, but they don't get it. Thank you all. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Mackenzie. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope you have a fantastic day, wonderful weekend, and stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great self-care afternoon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Where is Mackenzie's email address? Did that get posted?
It's in the chat.
Okay, I did not see it up there. Is it like at the beginning?
Oh, I privately messaged it. Julie, I'm also going to send you a message this afternoon, but I will send it again to everyone.
Okay.
There we go.
Perfect.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks,
Perfect.
Mike.
Great to see you. Bonnie, good to see you.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See you on Tuesday, Martin.
Very nice timing.
Yeah, welcome to UNH, guys.